Sinach had lived between the stage lights and the quiet of her own heart for a very long time. She had discovered at the age of 53 that both fame and faith carry a certain amount of weight. She finally decided it was time to speak one peaceful evening while sitting by herself, not to defend herself but to put an end to years of whispering. Her eyes conveyed the strength of a lady who had endured far more than the world would ever know, even though her speech and tone were serene and sweet. She started chatting quietly, as if she were speaking to herself. According to her, there are times in life when your only language is silence. This isn't because you don't have any answers, but rather because you want to preserve what is sacred. People had been discussing her marriage, her spouse, and her family life for years. They had created tales based on her silence, filling in the voids she never attempted to address with hearsay. But now, she claimed, it was time to tell her the truth, which was based on faith rather than defense or rage. Sinach thought back to the beginning of her ministry, when she began singing in church with nothing more than a desire to serve God. She had no idea that her songs would be heard over the world or that people would eventually become interested in her personal life. She had, however, learned to cope with it by singing even when she was in pain and smiling when she was misinterpreted. Looking back, she saw that her silence had never been a sign of weakness. She used it as a means of allowing God to speak for her. Sometimes peace doesn't come from explaining yourself, she continued, finishing the thought with a little smile. It results from having faith that the truth will prevail on its own. The unending rumors. Rumors had followed Sinach like a shadow that would not go away for over 10 years. The same questions about her husband, her marriage, and her personal life would come up each time she put out a new psalm or gave a performance abroad. Some claimed that she was concealing something. Some said her marriage had broken down. Some even attempted to attribute her silence to pride or aloofness. Watching lies proliferate more quickly than her music was difficult for her. She frequently came across headlines that misrepresented her words and made up untrue things. She never retaliated, though. When the time was right, she thought, the truth would speak if she remained focused on her objective. She didn't owe anyone an explanation, according to many of her supporters. However, the more loudly they stood up for her, the more people conjectured. She turned into a mystery in her own narrative, a devout woman surrounded by rumors. She acknowledged that it stung a lot on certain nights. It hurt to be discussed by strangers who were unaware of the sacrifices she made in order to remain faithful and to be evaluated by people who had never met her. But she prayed rather than respond. Every rumor turned into an excuse to put greater faith in God. Every falsehood served as a reminder that her life belonged to her Creator and not to the general public. The silent woman. Sinach's quiet has frequently been misinterpreted. Contrary to popular belief, she didn't want to be in the spotlight because she was proud. Behind her quiet was a lady who had opted for prayer over action and tranquility for cacophony. She had discovered that not all truths had to be proclaimed. Certain facts develop subtly in the heart till the appropriate moment. She talked about how she learned this lesson from her marriage. She refused to allow resentment to fester when her husband was accused of things he never said or did. Rather, she made the decision to support and adore him in secret. She claimed that keeping quiet was how she safeguarded her family, her tranquility, and her vocation. She gave her all to her music over those years. Not only were songs like Waymaker and I Know Who I Am worship anthems, but they also represented her talks with God while she was in anguish. She was healing herself as much as serving others when she sang. After years of waiting, her son was born, which was her biggest miracle. Recalling that time, she grinned and described it as an indication that God hears prayers even during protracted periods of silence. She claimed to have recognized that day that all she had gone through was setting her up for something bigger. The real story of her husband. Sinach finally opened up about her husband, Joseph Egbu, after years of silence. No man is perfect, but Joseph was God's choice for her, she whispered. Although he wasn't famous, his faith was more powerful than any attention. He was the man who supported every song she wrote, and she referred to him as her prayer partner. She disclosed that he was the one who inspired her to travel, sing, and serve God fearlessly. Despite rumors that he controlled her or kept their distance from one another tried their patience, when fame put strain on them, and when expectations were high. However, each obstacle led them to rely more on prayer than pride. Silently, she remarked, people perceived silence as weakness. But stillness was peace for us. We simply needed to demonstrate our faith to God. We didn't need to demonstrate our love to the outside world. Her confession revolved around that sentence, which served as a reminder that what appeared to be broken on the outside was actually being gracefully rebuilt. The battles behind the scenes, not every grin on stage conveyed the whole truth. Sinach had endured years of suffering, waiting, and spiritual struggles behind the brilliant lights. For years, she and Joseph had yearned to have children. They were occasionally put to the test when they witnessed others receiving blessings they were still yearning for. There were times when the silence was so profound that it was difficult to pray. However, they never turned against one another during it all. They continued to worship together, thinking that their waiting was a sign of preparedness rather than punishment. Sinach claimed that everything changed when God eventually gave them a kid. She was reminded that postponement does not equate to denial. Her miracle was eventually lauded by the same people who had previously whispered about her suffering. She talked about how those years of silence strengthened their bond. They were actually growing to love more deeply, not through words, but through understanding, while the outside world believed they had drifted apart. She declared, "We weren't absent. In silence, we were growing." Her healing language: music. Sinach's healing language has always been music. Every song told a tale, sometimes one of happiness, sometimes one of sorrow, but always one of faith. She disclosed that Joseph frequently served as an inspiration for her writing. Before recording sessions, he would pray with her and remind her that every song should have a message in addition to a melody. She recalled that on restless nights, she would sit at her piano and compose songs that resembled dialogues with God. Joseph would frequently sit close by, silent yet encouraging. Psalms that would eventually bless millions of people were born out of those situations. She was testifying to a God who made a way during her darkest moments when she sung Waymaker, not merely crafting a worship tune. Even if listeners were unaware of it, every lyric told her narrative. She used music as a therapeutic tool, a means of confession, and a tool for her vocation. Belief over notoriety. Sinach clarified that she never intended to become famous. Her goal was to share the word of God, not her own name. However, becoming famous came with its own set of difficulties, including rumors, criticism, and opinions that attempted to determine her value. She held fast to her faith through it all. She gained the ability to forgive anyone who misinterpreted her. Since light inevitably reveals darkness, she came to understand that carrying light entails being talked about. She claimed that instead of viewing gossip as agony, she now regarded it as evidence that she was important to the world in unexpected ways. With each miscommunication, her trust became stronger. She declared, "If my story teaches anything, it's that God's promises don't need to be defended. They eventually prove themselves." "Yes, I heard it all," is the confession. Sinach replied, quite honestly, that she was aware of everything that people said, including rumors, comments, and headlines. But rather of allowing it to ruin her, she used it to serve as a reminder of who she was. "Yes, I heard it all, and I chose peace," she affirmed. She acknowledged that there were difficulties, but she made it apparent that each one just strengthened her bond with her spouse and God. "If I can confirm anything today, it's that God turned every rumor they made into a testimony," she went on. "We fought for peace, not for attention. We made an effort to remain committed rather than to be flawless." Her comments were filled with grace rather than resentment, and her voice was stern but gentle. The world had been waiting for this revelation, but it came with wisdom rather than rage. Looking ahead, a graceful legacy. At 53, Sinach reflected on the past with thankfulness rather than regret. She claimed that each season, both happy and sad, had equipped her for serenity. She was now more than simply a gospel singer. She was a living example of perseverance, love, and divine timing. She praised God for supporting her through every rumor, her admirers for believing even when they didn't understand, and her husband for being her silent strength. She declared that the sound of worship will be the foundation of her legacy rather than the din of rumors.